track here. Testing, testing, testing. We are not sure why this is not producing sound at the moment. So I'm just trying to figure this out.
In the meantime.
Okay, I'm going to disconnect and reconnect. So. Okay, am I any sound now? Sound now, okay. Figured out. Wrong profile. Did some recording last week and didn't change the profile back. Okay, we're good. Oh, awesome. All right. Wow. That was hard stopping. The problem with OBS Studio, it's so complicated. You can often make a switch and not realize that settings aren't right for something else. Okay, so sorry about that. I want to welcome everyone today to our 85th live stream, which is St. Nicholas versus Arius, the cage match. This time, it's theological. Okay, this is, of course, a reference to Christmas, and I want to wish everyone here a very, very Merry Christmas. This is our last video before Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. So, so I want to thank everyone who's joined us here tonight. This is also an allusion to a little urban legend that's grown up around St. Nicholas, which is during the Council of Nicaea. It is said that St. Nicholas went down from the stands and punched Arius in the mouth. So,
yes, their debates got.
Yes, it is very true that debates back then got exceptionally heated. Okay, they weren't beyond fisticuffs. Okay? The early church was not genteel. It's definitely not genteel. These debates got very, very rancorous at times. So this is tipping the hat to St. Nicholas, who is also, say, the patron saint of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. So, again, a very, very interesting character. He was also said to have very much cared for children, and this is where the whole idea of St. Nick as a gift giver came out. So, a fascinating character of church history, well worth a look at if you're not familiar with him. So, with that said, we are going to get to your questions. Again, it's the same as always, which is that we take a few non-super chats first, then we give the super chats priority, and then we go back and see if there's anything that catches my eye on the non-super chats. Now, if you want to ask a question and it's not a super chat, we ask that you put a Q and the colon at the beginning of the question so that I know it's addressed to me. I also ask that if you do ask a question, that you only post it once. That way I can sort of keep track of it in the Twidget app that I use to sort of keep track of all the questions. I also ask that if you do a verse out of the Bible or ask a question about the language, that you give me the chapter, book, verse as a reference so I have some context, and with the language, tell me what language you think it is and what do you think it means. So with that said, let's get into the questions. Okay. Our first question of the night is actually from Darkblade. And he asks, if the Egyptians generally didn't farm and raise pigs because of the effect on the waterway, can the lack of pig bones at Avaris still be considered evidence of Semitic habitation? Okay. Well, they did farm. They did farm. Egyptians were very much farmers. They were agrarian. This was an agrarian society. So they did farm. They didn't tend to raise pigs. They tended to raise more cattle. They were really a cattle culture more than anything else. But they also have a lot of crops as well, such as emmer, wheat, barley. They also grew vegetables too. So they were quite adept at farming. Now, I would agree that the lack of pig bones at Avaris is not considered evidence for Semitic habitation. However, Avaris has a whole lot of other identifying marks of Semitic habitation. It has Semitic pottery, Semitic iconographic designs, Semitic burials. That's the famous Semitic four-room house. So there's a lot of Semitic evidence out of Avaris. There's really no question that these people were Semitic. The lack of pig bones, while not in and of itself evidence of Semitic habitation, is certainly suggestive that, say, when the Israelites do go over to Canaan, that they bring that with them. Because one of the things we have to understand is that the lack of pig bones alone is not itself evidence of Semitic habitation. Because the Canaanites that inhabit Canaan, prior to the Israelites, they ate pig. They ate pig all over the place. That's sort of how we can tell, say, Canaanite settlements from Israelite settlements. Is that the Canaanite settlements, they ate pig, but the Israelite settlements didn't. So this always begs the question of, well, where do the Israelites get this from? Well, it makes sense if they're from Avaris. Makes perfect sense. They're bringing that Egyptian culture, that Egyptian tradition with them over into Canaan. So there is the lack of pig bones at Avaris is not evidence of Semitic habitation per se, but it sure is suggestive of their Egyptian origin, at least the Israelites' origin. And there's a lot of other things at Avaris that are really Semitic. Unquestionably Semitic. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the question. Fascinating question. Okay. Our next non-super chat here is from Mr. Rich B.O.B., who writes in Greek. Dente lee ho agios Nikolaos den lee ko komoiusius. All right. Did Saint Nicholas not say ho 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 of like substance? Okay. No, he did not say this.
So the ho 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 is a hint just trying to get out.
Yeah, okay. My pronunciation isn't great, but my pronunciation isn't great in any language, even English. So there you go. All right. The whole point here is that Saint Nicholas did not say homoiousius. He was a proponent of homoousius, of the same subject, of the same substance. One of the big controversies at the Council of Nicaea was, even though everyone was in agreement that Arius was in the wrong, and this we were talking about the Council of Nicaea 325 AD, where Arius tried to argue that Christ was a separate creation. He was essentially the first creation of God the Father. Of course, that's heresy and it was very apparent at the council that it was heresy. But it then came down to, well, what is the relationship of the Son to the Father? Is he of same substance or is he of like substance? Now, in the First Nicene Council, there was a lot of people who were really in favor of like substance. because they thought that might have been a stronger statement of, say, the personhood of Christ versus the personhood of the Father. But it became readily apparent that like substance would eventually slip back into a kind of Arianism back again. So it was a compromise position that really did not work. So ultimately, the Council of Nicaea decided that the proper definition of the relationship of the Father to the Son was homoousios, the same substance. So that's sort of the background here of the whole Nicene Council, at least its most important issue, which was the determination of the teaching of Arius. So Saint Nicholas definitely did not say homoousios. He said homoousios. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. It's a fun question, and it was presented in a fun way, even if my Greek pronunciation is atrocious. Live with it.
You do Hebrew and
Yeah, it's not my primary work. Greek is not my primary working language, so you can't expect me to have perfect pronunciation here. So. Okay, our next non-super chat is from Dale McKenzie, and he goes, Dr. Falk, 2 Chronicles 27:29 outlines the reigns of Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. It appears that Ahaz was 9 when Hezekiah was born. This seems unlikely. Do you think Jotham could be Hezekiah's father? Okay. When you do the math, it turns out that Ahaz was actually 11, not 9. So, okay. 9, yeah, that's kind of cutting it close. But 11, there are actually several people recorded in history that did father a child at age 11. It's biologically possible. The youngest person on record to have fathered a child was age 9. Okay, and this was back in the 1850s. So it is biologically possible for someone 9 years old to father a child. And actually, it's even possible for a woman to bring a child to birth a year younger than that. So it's within the realms of human biology. Is it unusual? Yeah, sure, absolutely. It's unusual. It doesn't happen that often, but at the same time, too, it can and does happen, especially with the particular circumstances here. Now, the particular circumstances here is, Ahaz comes to the throne. And the first thing you have to do is you have to produce an heir. Okay? You have to produce an heir. So, there's a lot of pressure, even on somebody who maybe not be emotionally mature enough to have a properly functioning relationship in this particular context situation. To marry, or at least for political purposes. I mean, you're running a kingdom here. You're running a kingdom. Treaties in the ancient Near East are sealed by a trade of daughters. So you're going to have to man up and do the duty for the kingdom. So. I do think that there's a lot here that is based upon the context of what Ahaz was living in. He's a king. He's a king at a very young age, and thus he has to start producing heirs, or at least he's the prince at the time. So he's getting married off. He's having to produce heirs because this is how you perpetuate the royal line. And, the fact is, too, we see this in other places as well, where, there are attempts of very young kings to be married and to start producing heirs as soon as possible. We know that, for example, King Tut he comes to the throne at age 10. And he's already married at that point. He's already married off to Ankh-Sunamun. And the couple is already trying to produce children, while he's 10 and she's 11. So, this happened in the ancient Near East. No one's saying it's ideal. Okay, no one's saying it's ideal. No one's saying it's a good thing. But it is a political necessity of that day and age. So, anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. And it's interesting. It's also kind of unfortunate, too. But there you go. All right. Now we're on to the super chats. Okay. Our first super chat here comes from 501 Mobius for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Numbers 21:11 is confusing. Okay. Is Abraham facing Moab, which is to the east, or lie Abraham to the east? Zerah should be on the border between Edom and Moab. Let me bring up the Bible here. Because I'm not really sure what you're talking about here. Oh. This is Numbers. One, verse 11. Okay. I'll get some context here. This is the bronze serpent narrative. Verse 9. And Moses made a bronze serpent and set it on a standard, and it came about that if the serpent bit any man, when he looked to the bronze serpent, he lived. Now the sons of Israel moved out and camped at Oboth. And they journeyed from Oboth and camped at La Abarim in the wilderness, which is opposite Moab to the east. Okay, opposite to Moab. Okay, so it would probably be on the... My guess is it's probably on, say, to the east of Moab, because this is where they're doing these encampments. This is before they enter the Promised Land, so they're not in Judah yet. So it should be. From there they set out in Wadi Zered. I'd have to look up the Wadi Zered. I'm not really that familiar with the geography of Moab. So I'd have to do a little more reading on geography here to try to figure out exactly here what's going on. But it would make sense if it was east of Moab, or even potentially east of Edom. But again, without digging into the maps here of Moab, it would be very difficult to sort of piece this together. So unfortunately, that's probably all I can say here. This is not an issue I've really looked into. But again, okay, so they set out and camped at Wadi Zered, verse 13. From there they journeyed and camped on the other side of the Arnon. Now we know where that is. Okay. Which is on the wilderness, which comes out of the borders of the Amorites, for Arnon is the border of Moab, between Moab and the Amorites. Okay. This is that region that had been contested by the sons of Ammon. So the Arnon stretches essentially from the Moab up through the territory of the Ammonites, and then into the Heshbon. So that's so there sounds like at least this strongly indicates that um, La Ibrahim is on, I think it's La Ibrahim. Let me just double check that in the Hebrew. Okay, Aya. Okay, Aya. Aya Ibrahim. Oh, interesting. That's an interesting, very interesting spelling on that. So it's almost, it sounds like it's a spring from the etymology of this. So well, that's very interesting in itself. I don't know if you'd be able to find this on the map then, if it's just a spring. Springs tend to be very small, sort of more or less way stations. So would be very difficult to sort of nail this down in a modern equivalent. But I'll look into this a little more. And see what I can dig up, okay? So anyway, I want to thank you very much for the super chat. I very, very much appreciate it, and it's good to have you here tonight. Okay, our next super chat is from the Camillopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Shalom. Is the idea of an eternal soul pagan? What about a place of eternal punishment? Okay. Good questions. A place of eternal judgment is not necessarily pagan. You don't actually see a lot of this in pagan literature. You do see some conception of an eternal soul. Now, I know there are people out there that say this comes from Hellenism. No, it doesn't. No. A lot of cultures believed in an eternal soul, and it was not just the Greeks. The Egyptians believed in eternal souls. The Mesopotamians believed in eternal souls. It's likely too that the Canaanites did as well. So it's not an idea that's inherently pagan, but it is an idea that comes out of the idea that this is not all that there is. That life goes on even once you pass on. So it's not a pagan idea per se. You do find it in paganism, but you also find other things in paganism too that are not explicitly pagan that we would accept as say, biblical truth, but that are also found in pagan literature. So we have to be careful here that just because it's, there's a particular fallacy here that I think we need to be very aware of, which is that it's often expressed like this: just because Hitler brushed his teeth doesn't mean you shouldn't brush your teeth. Okay? Just because somebody pagan affirms a true idea doesn't mean you should reject the idea. Yeah, and then this has been noted by the luminaries of the church for 2,000 years. Thomas Aquinas even noted this. So just because somebody pagan believes something that happens to be true does not make it false. So just because there are other pagan cultures out there that believe in an eternal soul does not mean it's not eternal. It doesn't mean it's pagan either. It's hard to be 100% wrong. It's hard to be 100% right. Just like it's difficult for theologians to nail everything down perfectly right. It's also very, very difficult for pagans to get everything 100% wrong too. There's going to be a certain percentage that they get right. So, and I think this is one of them. Now, Amir Ashraf said it's the fallacy of association. Yeah, it is the fallacy of association. Now, the place of eternal punishment. We don't find this so much in pagan literature. It does kind of creep in a little bit as you get closer to the Common Era, but it's not something you do see a lot of in pagan literature. Only if you were really, really bad, there might be a place for you. Like the Greeks had their version of Tartarus, where only the baddest of the bad went to. Everyone else went to the Elysium Fields. But, there was a place where 2 humans were sent because they were so bad. Sisyphus was one of them. These were who the Greeks thought, so bad that they couldn't even go anywhere even remotely good. So it's not something you find a lot of in pagan literature. It seems to be more associated with say early biblical literature than it is with say pagan literature. So anyway, I hope that answers your questions. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay. Our next super chat is from Mouthwash for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he says, Saw claim the Ogdoad is Noah's family. Noah, Nun, Amun, Shem, Hay, Japheth, Kek, Ham, with wives. Do these names have similar meanings? No. No. Oh boy. Yeah. Ooh. Amun means to be hidden. We have no idea what Shem actually means. Noon, no. Yeah, this I don't place any stock in this. Okay. This is just wishful thinking. This is wishful thinking. Okay, this is just plain old wishful thinking. Yeah. And the fact is too that the Ogdoad is 8 members. It's 8 members. Okay. So, once you start including all the wives in that, yeah, okay, you might have 8 members, but that's a problem that there's no way to equate that to do a 1-to-1 equivalence with, say, the 8 members of the Ogdoad and the family of Noah. It just, yeah, this is wishful thinking, and I can't say it any more than that. Warrior the Most High says, I think I once saw that claim in a creationist article. Wouldn't surprise me. It would not surprise me. You see a lot of bizarre claims in creationist articles. And I think that's really, really unfortunate. Because we need to look, we need to be credible. We need to be credible in our scholarship. Theories like this are not credible. They're not credible. When you start looking at, say, the Egyptians' equivalents, it just falls apart. It just completely falls apart. So I don't know what else to say here other than this is just out in left field. This is out in left field. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, but there's no credibility to this at all. Okay, our next super chat here is from Zeobeo for 22 euros. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And he says, I'm debating someone saying Hebrew in the Torah is post 1000 BC Canaanite language. Something about grammatical cases and fricatives changing. There's something to that. There's something to that. Also, they say there isn't enough data whether Moabite and Edomite had Egyptian loanwords. Well, this is a half-truth. Okay. Let's sort of get into this. Let's sort of tease this apart. Now, it is true that the Hebrew found in the Torah has been updated. Okay? Now, when we talk about Semitic languages, we have to understand that early Semitic languages, Semitic languages that predate 1000 BC, are very, very similar to each other. Incredibly similar. In fact, they're so similar, it would be almost impossible to tell apart early Hebrew from early Edomite or early Moabite. They're that similar. So, there's some truth here that the Hebrew in the Torah is post 1000 BC. Because the Torah was updated with more conventional Hebrew spellings, just to update the language to what it had turned into. And I don't think there's really anyone who really argues against that. Okay, so there is some updating, but at the same time too, that's not the same as saying that the original authorship was post 1000 BC. Because one of the things we know about texts, thanks to the very, very long textual traditions we have in Egypt, is that scribes updated texts over time to fit the current conventions of grammar and spelling. So, just because a text has let's say, a New Kingdom spelling, doesn't necessarily mean that that's a New Kingdom text. That text could have gone all the way back to the Middle or even the Old Kingdom. Likewise, just because the Hebrew in the Torah is post 1000 BC does not mean that the original text was post 1000 BC. It doesn't follow. Okay? Now, let's take the second part of this. Because in some respects, he is correct. There isn't enough data to indicate whether Moabite and Edomite had Egyptian loanwords. Absolutely true. Okay? We don't even have to debate that. But we have enough Ugaritic and enough Aramaic to show that they didn't have many Egyptian loanwords comparatively. And that's the rub. Okay?
St. Max gets it. Punch into Arius.
Okay, so there's the rub. Yes, we don't have enough data from Moabite or Edomite, but we have enough data from Ugaritic and from Aramaic. And in the case of Aramaic, we even have letters that are coming from Egypt, written in Imperial Aramaic, that have less Egyptian loanwords on, say, a per word basis. So, the argument still stands that there must have been some really deep influence of the Egyptians on, the Israelite culture, because where we have deep influence by the Egyptian culture, we don't have the same amount of loanwords that we find in, say, the Torah. So, anyway, I hope that helped. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And fascinating question. Okay, our next super chat here is again from Zayo Bayo for 22 euros. Thank you very much for the super chat. Thoughts on Genesis 7:2? Clean and unclean animals with Noah. Did he anachronistically keep kosher law? Sorry if asked before. Merry Christmas. Well, Merry Christmas to you also. And you haven't asked this before, so we're cool. Not that that's a problem. People repeat questions all the time. So we're more than happy to answer questions on a repeated basis. And part of the reason we are is because sometimes we add new insights. We get new insights. We add, details that we learn along the way. We're all in the learning process. Even I'm in a learning process. Yeah, okay, I have a PhD, but I'm a perpetual student. I'm always learning. I think it's important to always learn. Now, did Noah keep anachronistically the kosher law? No. Okay, sorry. No, he did not keep the kosher law. But the kosher law is important for the Israelites. This is a retrojection. This is a way of showing the Israelites coming out of Egypt how they should be behaving. Because the last thing Moses wants to do is basically tell the story of Noah with basically no reference to how the Israelites are supposed to live going forward. Because invariably somebody is going to look at the story of Noah and goes, he ate pig. Why can't I eat pig? Okay? So, in some respects, Moses and his amanuensis, they're not going. They want to sort of nip that sort of thing in the bud. So they're gonna retrospectively include references to kosher law inside the Noah narrative, just so nobody gets the wrong idea. Essentially, that's what's going on here. So, because the fact is that if you can make a case that the covenant with Noah supersedes any later covenant, there is some argument to be made there. So, because there is the conception in the ancient world that whatever's oldest is best, not necessarily what is most current is what is in effect. So, with that said, I think that what we have here is that the writer who's recording the story of Noah, he is basically retrojecting the kosher laws upon Noah to basically show Israel this is the way you should be going. So I think that's what's just what's going on there. So anyway, I hope that helps. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. And great question. Okay, our next super chat here is from Pablo Andres for $9.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he asks, why does the Book of Daniel have so many critics regarding its date? Oh boy. Do you have an opinion of this? Yes, I do. Who's your favorite prophet in the Old Testament? Oh boy. Well, I'll answer the first one first. Last question first. My favorite Old Testament prophet is going to be Moses. I mean, it's going to be Moses, straight up. You can't dedicate your life to studying the Exodus and hate Moses. So, that's sort of a no-brainer for me. Now, the Book of Daniel. The Book of Daniel is very, very controversial because it makes certain predictions that don't seem to be, that almost if seem to be almost ex eventu prophecy. Now, what is ex eventu prophecy? Ex eventu prophecy is prophecy that's written after the fact. So an event happens, and then you write a prophecy to explain the event. This is very common in certain Middle Eastern literature, like in, say, the prophecy of Nefertiti, where the Egyptian writer, is writing ex eventu prophecy to bolster politically the Middle Kingdom bureaucracy of Amenhotep I. However, I don't think all prophecy is necessarily ex eventu. So, because Daniel seems to be talking about things that only somebody who can perfectly predict the future can seem to grasp, a lot of critics do think that the Book of Daniel was written late. Now, I think those critics sort of grasp at straws when they try to look at the internal evidence and say, oh, this is a late date. I mean, I've heard some crazy arguments regarding Daniel. Really crazy arguments. Like, I've heard that the Aramaic used in Daniel was too late. It's too late for it to be written at during the late 6th, early 5th centuries BC. And really, Aramaic goes back even further than that. So there's really no justification for that criticism. Keeps learning ex eventu prophecy. Okay, I'll just type in the chat here. Ex eventu prophecy. Okay. So, my opinion on Daniel is it's pretty much written in the um the early 5th century, essentially. So that's my opinion on when it's dated. I don't think it's as late or as early as the 6th century BC, or sorry, the 6th century BC, but I do think it's 5th. I do think it's 5th. I certainly don't hold to, say, the critics that think it's. I mean, some critics basically said it's as late as 150 BC. I certainly don't hold to that. I mean, I think that's really out there. So I've got some issues with how a lot of critics have been treating Daniel. There was a very, very good book that was edited by Wiseman and Fairman on which has a collection of essays on the dating of Daniel, and I think it's very, very interesting. It's a very good book. It's out of print, unfortunately, but it addresses many of these issues, and most of these issues are pretty easy to overcome when it comes right down to it. So anyway, that's my opinion on the Book of Daniel. I hope that helps. Thank you very much for super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, our next super chat here is from Billy Ningen for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Merry Christmas, Dr. Falk and your family. Well, Merry Christmas to you too. And he says, if Genesis 1:11 has Mesopotamian context, plus Akkadian was still used well into the 6th century BC, yep, true, could the exilic dating be favored over Mosaic authorship? Well, I don't think so. I don't think so. And part of the reason I don't think the exilic dating here is really could be favored is even though I think that there's a problem is the if Genesis 1-11 has a Mesopotamian context. I think that's problematic right there. There's an assumption built into your protasis that I think needs some work. Because the fact is, Genesis 1:11 is not strictly Mesopotamian. It's not strictly Mesopotamian. It's really ancient Near Eastern in a more general way. I mean, we find references to Egyptian myth in Genesis 1:11 too. If this is a Mesopotamian context, then where are they getting the Egyptian myth from? So it isn't just restricted to Mesopotamia. So I think if you've got if you've got that if statement there, and you have to look at this and say, okay, how much Egyptians in here? How much local Canaanites in here? We do have certain aspects that do seem to allude to Mesopotamian, like, for example, Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh seems to be alluded to in Genesis, but we find copies of Gilgamesh spread out from Mesopotamia all the way over to Ugarit. So, it's a well established and well copied story. Very, very well copied. There's even some suggestion that Egyptians had access to these stories in Egypt. So I don't think that you can just say that because it has the context and plus Akkadian is still around, that you could necessarily favor exilic authorship. You'd still run into problems with that whole idea. But you would, in order to maintain that idea, you would really have to isolate Genesis 1-11 as its own separate literary unit that has no relation to the other texts. I think that's difficult. When you start chopping up the biblical texts down to sections that are favorable for your argument, that tells me that the argument's not very strong. I think if it'd be much more compelling if you had the entirety of Genesis, and then could make the same argument. Then it might be a little more compelling. But then you start running into real problems, such as what do you do with the whole Joseph narrative? I mean, that's a huge portion of the text. So I think there's difficulties when you have to isolate a certain text, separate it from the rest of the text, its surrounding text, to get to the result you want. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. It is a controversial subject. It is definitely a controversial subject, and scholars do disagree here. They do. Whether or not how strong that Mesopotamian context is, what were the texts that were influencing, say, the biblical writers. So there's a lot of unanswered questions here. But anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay. The next super chat is also from Billy Ningen for $5. Thank you very much, super chat. Dr. Falk, do you believe in the possibility of vampires, werewolves, cyclops, or cryptids in general? Ooh. 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 Interesting question. All right. Let's rule out a couple possibilities here. I don't believe in cyclops. Okay. Let's rule that one out right there. Now, the others are a whole different kettle of fish, as it were. Generally, I don't believe in these things as being supernatural creatures. Like, for example, I don't believe in vampires as being walking cadavers. Okay, I don't believe in that. But I do know that there are people out there who think they're vampires, who are living people, who are not necessarily have Renfield syndrome, but will drink blood and think it's efficacious. And that's a hard argument not to make. Because, the scriptures tell us the life is in the blood. And that, we are to drain the blood when we eat the meat. But we also practice the whole, the Eucharist. We practice the Eucharist, which is the body and the blood of Christ. We believe that has certain efficacy. So, the vampires have something there. At least the living ones. As far as werewolves and lycanthropy in general. Lycanthropy is basically the idea that humans can change into animal-like forms. The whole issue of lycanthropy is one that's really interesting all by itself. It has actually, like in Native American myth, there's strong beliefs in the possibility of lycanthropy. By the way, I just saw my video monitor glitch here. Are we still on the air? Can you guys still hear us? Are we still on? Can everyone hear me? Okay, we're still good. Okay. So we'll just take that as a YouTube glitch then. Okay. All right. Yeah, it's done that now for 2 live streams, and it's really odd. So I don't know why YouTube has all of a sudden decided to act up here. So as long as you can hear me, as long as you can still see me, then we're okay. We're good. So with that said, so werewolves. Getting back to werewolves. There is both a Western tradition of werewolf and a Native American version of it. We even see some legends of lycanthropy in Southeast Asia as well. So, for example, the North American practice was basically among shamans, where they thought that they could conjure a animal spirit that inhabited them and turn them into, say, animal-like forms, like the Wendigo and the Manitou. So there is some, I guess, anthropological work, cultural anthropology that should be done to study this issue further. As far as cryptids. Now, cryptids are just ordinary animals that are just hidden. It comes from the word crypto to mean to hide. So a cryptid is, say, like an animal that's, like Bigfoot or what's another one? Loch Ness Monster. Generally, I don't believe in cryptids. Okay? But I'm also not close to the possibility that there are some cryptids out there. So I don't believe in them, but I'm not close-minded to them either. Yeah, I mean, people didn't believe in gorillas when they were first described in the 19th century. I mean, the whole idea. I mean, no one had seen a gorilla in Europe. The whole idea of an ape-like creature the size of a man or larger. This was something that was just seen as fantastic in Europe.
Man, hairy.
Yeah.
With fangs, but human eyes.
Yeah. Size of a man, human eye. Well, they don't have human eyes.
They look like.
Yeah, but they don't. But
yeah.
But they're big, hairy, almost man-like. So there's and we have there's things in this world, especially in the deep oceans. In the deep oceans is where we're likely to find the most hidden creatures, because while the land has been mostly explored, the deep oceans, we know more about outer space than we do about the deep oceans. So there's a lot of stuff in the deep oceans that have yet to be discovered. Now, I'm not saying Megalodon is down there. I don't think there's any monster sharks down there. But I think we still are going to see some pretty weird animals. Interestingly enough, I took a vacation once, and I went to this aquarium conference. And at this aquarium conference, there was a, deep sea explorer. This guy was an explorer in waters, and he had this interesting presentation called "Animals that are not currently in the aquarium trade but should be." Of course, this is a conference for aquarium and coral reef keepers, so we're all deeply interested in this stuff. But he showed some animals that I had never seen in my life. It was absolutely fascinating. One of the most interesting ones was a cuttlefish that was 1 inch long. A previously undiscovered species up to that year. But as I said, it's a cuttlefish, but only 1 inch long. I mean, fascinating. I didn't know such an animal existed. But those are the sort of things that I think will sort of be discovered as things go along. It's not necessarily the big creatures, but the small ones. Small ones. Like the like they talk about the like 90% of bacteria have never been properly cataloged. Stuff like that. So I do think there's some lots of possibilities to to discover new animals, new cryptids, animals that have been evaded mankind. But I also think we're getting to the point where we're seeing the smaller and smaller animals now. That we've pretty much seen most of the big ones. We've discovered most of the big ones, but we're now getting to the smaller and smaller ones, and that's where I think the horizon of discovery is in, say, zoology. But I don't believe in like Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot or anything like that. So when we talk about cryptids, we have to be very specific what we mean here. So yeah, I don't think there's a Yeti either. Although it would be really, really cool if there was a Yeti. I have known people that have claimed to have seen some pretty bizarre creatures. But I don't necessarily believe in them myself. I do think that there's a lot of strange stuff in this world, though. A lot of strange stuff. And I think we do need to be open to a lot more possibilities than we say are currently basically generally accepted, say, even amongst, say, biblical scholars or society at large. Because the more we learn, the more we find out we don't know. The more we learn, the more we find out we don't know, and we have to be humble to that fact. There's always something we don't know. So I think if we just want to be humble before the facts, we have to say, okay, yeah, we don't know everything. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And that's sort of my opinion. It's like, well, it depends what you mean by each one of those. Vampires? The living ones? Yes. The walking cadavers? No. Werewolves? Yeah, there's something that cultural anthropologists do need to really study here. Cyclops? No. Don't believe in Cyclops. Cryptids? Yeah, possibly. But by no means the big ones in general. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. And I hope that you found that interesting. Okay, our next super chat here is again from Billy Ningen for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Dr. Falk, was exorcism a thing in ancient Israel or was it borrowed from Persia? Ooh, well. We do know that the Israelites did believe in at least possession. Say, possession by unclean spirits before the exile. We do have we have things like the witch vendor, where she's calling up Samuel. She's not expecting Samuel. She's expecting a familiar spirit. We have things like Saul, who is possessed and oppressed by an unclean spirit. So it does seem that the Israelites believe in possession. And I think that anytime you see a culture that believes in possession by spirits, you are going to also, as a consequence, find exorcism as an attempt to remove the unclean spirits. So I don't think it was necessarily borrowed from Persia. Although, say, Persia could have influenced how exorcism was done. That's always possible. And we don't know enough about Persian exorcism to really know. We actually have more information on this from, say, Akkadian records. Like, there's a whole lot of Akkadian medical texts, and this is something I should look up and read a little more on, honestly. There's a lot of good books published on Mesopotamian medicine, among which SBL published an incredibly good one on. I have a copy of it, but I haven't actually gone through it and read it yet. I should. I should also go through Papyrus Ebers as well and do the same sort of study. But my copious free time and all that, which I don't have, prevents me from reading as much as I want to. But I think what we're dealing with here, as far as exorcism, I do think this is a pre-exile custom, but like all customs, they do change over time. So there might have been exorcisms prior to the exile, but it would be also equally true to say that once they returned from Babylon, those exorcisms would look very different. They wouldn't be the same. And I think by the time you're into, say, the Second Temple period up until the time of Christ, they're very different again. So exorcism is not one of those sort of customs that's, say, the same at one time. It does radically change over time. I mean, for example, you look at the rite of exorcism in the Roman Catholic Church. It's exceptionally difficult from what you find in the early church. Incredibly different. They include a lot of things that were just not included in the original formulas for exorcism. Stuff such as, reciting the Mary, Mother of God, 10,000 times, So, there's things you find in the Roman Catholic rite that you'll never see in, say, more historical, say, early church or before exorcisms. So I think there's this that we have to keep that in mind that when we look at exorcism as a thing, it's not going to be the same from one period of time versus the other. But as long as the culture recognizes the possibility of possession, then there's inevitably going to be exorcism as well. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. Okay, we got an awesome super chat here from Jack Ray. Thank you so much for that very, very generous super chat of $100. Very much appreciated. Thank you so very much. Generosity like this really helps keep this channel afloat. So I want to thank you so very much. I want to wish you a Merry Christmas. And he says a Merry Christmas as well. Wow. You've been a great supporter of this channel, and we really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much, and it's great to have friends like you supporting this channel. So God bless you. Have a great Christmas, and have a great New Year as well. Thank you very much. The next one here is from Angel WVM for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he asks, do you think the Bible excludes the possibility of other people existing outside the Garden of Eden? Yeah, not after they're thrown out. Well, the whole question is the idea of people existing outside of Eden before the fall. And that's the million-dollar question right there. My thoughts on this is that the whole idea of Adam and Eve is that they are made in the image of God and his likeness to be in his temple. Okay, the whole Genesis 1-3 thing is the idea that God is creating creation to be his temple, and mankind is to be his image within the temple. So this would necessarily exclude other people existing outside of the confines of Eden. Now, we can always ask the question, was Adam and Eve alone in the garden? Did they have any children before? And were they affected by the fall? But I would think it seems very, very implausible that there would be other people outside of the garden, just because of what the function of the garden is, its purpose within creation, the purpose of mankind. Because the purpose of mankind is to reflect that image of God to God. So I don't think there's any real possibility of people outside of the garden, outside of Eden, before the fall. Because that would throw thwart the entire purpose of mankind, the garden, God's relationship with men, all of that. Now, once the fall happens, you only find people outside of the Garden of Eden. Okay? Because they're all kicked out. They're all excluded. So I do think the Bible actually excludes this possibility. And I think it excludes it not explicitly, but it does inherently have to exclude it for the rest of the narrative to make any sense. So I hope that explains it. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And I do think you do have to keep this in mind, that of the whole sort of telos of that Genesis narrative. Again, works out to this. This is a temple narrative. It's man within God's temple and within his sacred space that man corrupts. So whether that garden is a specific place in Eden, whether it's, say, Africa, wherever, that's an open question. That's a more open question. But inside the narrative, this is definitely, there's no people living outside of this that would be considered to be human beings. At least not human beings created in the image of God. So I think that we have to sort of draw the lines there. If there are any anthropoid organisms outside of it, they're not human beings, because they're not made in the image of God. But we don't necessarily have a strict confine either for where is the Garden of Eden or how expansive it was. So anyway, I hope that answered the question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay. We have another super chat here from Angel WVM for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he asks, what is the context of 2 Samuel 18:8 when it says the forest devoured more than the sword? Ooh, this is an interesting question. Get up our Bible. This one's fascinating. Okay. 2 Samuel 18. Let's start at verse 7 or 6. Okay. Verse 6. We'll start at verse 6. Then the people went out into the field against Israel, and the battle took place in the forest of Ephraim. And the people of Israel were defeated there before the servants of David, and the slaughter that day was great, 20,000 men. For the battle was spread over the whole countryside, and the forest devoured more people than the sword devoured. Now, Absalom, verse 9, happened to meet the servants of David, for Absalom was riding on his mule, and the mule went under a thick branches of a great oak, and his head caught fast in the oak, so he was left hanging between heaven and earth, while the mule under him kept going. Okay. So, what does it mean when the forest devoured more than the sword? This battle between Absalom's forces and the forces of David are taking place in around near the forest of Ephraim. Okay. Now, this is back when Ephraim still had forests. Okay, they don't have them today. But back then, there were forests in Ephraim. And part of being in a forest of this nature was this thicket underbrush that's more like thorns and basically thorn bushes. I mean, great big briars of thorns. So think of it this way. It's like a little bit like the Alamo. Okay? Kind of like the Alamo, where the Mexican army, surrounds the Alamo. And the few people that try to escape the Alamo run into acres of cactus, and they're more or less killed by the cactus. Same sort of deal here. So, Hanson Huron's confirmed. So essentially, these people are running away from the battle. They're running away from the battle, and they're going right into patches of thorns. So, and we see here, even when Absalom flees, he gets his hair caught in an oak branch and is hung, by his hair, essentially. So this is underbrush that's so thick, so dangerous that, you try to escape through there, you're going to get skewered. And you'll probably bleed to death, essentially. Which is how, oftentimes these sort of things go down. That's what happened at the Alamo. That's probably what happened here. Is that these guys tried to push their way through thick thickets and thorns and just got torn up. So this is what it means by the forest devoured more than the sword. So yeah, they made good their escape from the army, David's army, but they lost their life in other ways. So anyway, I hope that explains it. Thank you very much for the super chat. This was a very interesting question. It's a very, very interesting question. And it's a good question too, because it's you have to sort of think, okay, what was that original forest like? What's the dangers of being in a forest like this? And how do people die when they flee into a forest? I mean, even the forests around where I live here, and we got some old growth forests here, there's some places that are impassable just because of the undergrowth. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. And again, fascinating question. Okay, well, we're on to Twidget here. Just want to make sure here I didn't lose anything in the transition. Oh, there's one more that we have to get here. So I have to cut and paste this one. This will be just a second. Okay. Okay, the next one here is from WQ for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he asks, was brother-sister marriage actually common among Egyptian rulers? The quick answer is no, it wasn't. If so, why did they do this? All right, we'll get into that. Did the Ptolemies practice incest for the same reasons? Not quite. Okay. Here's how it worked. Brother-sister marriage was not actually very common among Egyptian rulers. Ernst Cherney did a study of 500 couples in ancient Egypt and discovered amongst those couples, only 2 couples were actually consanguineous brother-sister marriages. Very, very rare, even in Egypt. Very rare. It does happen, but it is exceptionally rare. Now, what confuses the matter is that Egyptians use brother and sister as terms of endearment. So whether or not they're related by blood, a husband will call his wife his sister, and the wife will call her husband her brother, even though they are not blood related. So this confuses matters, and it really confused early Egyptologists a lot. But we now know today that it was exceptionally uncommon. Now, why did they do this in the few cases where they did? It usually happened during a succession crisis. So the idea was, if there was a succession crisis, it was believed that the bloodline of the king wasn't strong enough to bear healthy children. So what they did was they would pair off the king with a royal princess. The idea here is it's a form of sympathetic magic. The king has royal blood, the queen has royal blood. Together, it's got to be better. Yeah, this is a case where science triumphs over magic. This is why, like, for example, King Tut was married to his half-sister. Because during the reign of King Tut, they were going through a succession crisis. His predecessor, Smenkhare, did not bear an heir. Now we have the last Theban prince on the throne, King Tut, and he has no heir. So at age 10, he's married off to his half-sister. It couldn't have been worse. It couldn't have been a less wise decision. But they didn't know. They were practicing sympathetic magic. Now, the Ptolemies. The Ptolemies didn't quite do it for the same reasons. Okay. The Ptolemies did it for a completely different reason. And there's some suggestion that the Ptolemies didn't practice incest in the same way as, say, the consanguineous marriages of earlier dynasties. Like, for example, a Ptolemy might be married off to a Cleopatra. And there's lots of Cleopatras, just like there was lots of Ptolemies. The idea here was not so much to... It wasn't so much to produce new heirs, to produce new strong heirs. That wasn't the point of it. The point of it was more to prevent nasty succession fighting, essentially. The idea is you take, say, two lines of the Ptolemies, and you marry them together so that you don't have rivalry for the throne or pretenders to the throne. So it was more for that. It was more to consolidate power than it was really for producing heirs. And the Ptolemies would have other wives as well. So, that's really where most of the heirs to the Ptolemy dynasty came from those secondary wives, not from, say, the Great Queen. So it wasn't done for the same reasons during the Ptolemaic period. It was done more for a consolidation of power. And there's even been some suggestion that the Ptolemies, in these consanguineous marriages, did not really engage in a lot of conjugal visits. That each had their own individual lovers. So it was really more of a marriage of a political marriage of convenience than it was, say, a marriage in the truest sense. So the Ptolemies are kind of an exception here. You don't find these sorts of, say, political marriages, at least in the most jaded way. These were political marriages in the most jaded way. Like, for example, Cleopatra VII is married off to a Ptolemy prince. And far from it preventing a succession, rival succession claims, it created civil war. Okay? It created civil war. You had Ptolemy the 12th, he's fighting Cleopatra the 7th, and Cleopatra's calling in Julius Caesar, and it turns into an ugly civil war. So it completely defeats the purpose. and things get ugly real fast. So yeah, it was all done to prevent rival claims. That's essentially the reason. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Brother sister marriage was not that common. The only exception is during times of succession crisis, and in the case of the Ptolemies, it was done to prevent rival claims to the throne. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay. Sure we didn't miss any others here, and then we get next one here. Okay, good here. So our next super chat here is from Kohelful with a very, very generous super chat of $49.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. What is your opinion on the missing patriarch clan situation? Were there two Isaacs, Jacobs, etc.? I know it's a touchy subject. Okay, I'll lay it out like this. I don't think that there were two Isaacs or Jacobs. But I do think that there were intermediaries that are not recorded. Now, in the case of Isaac, we don't know exactly when he would have lived in relationship to, say, Abraham or Jacob. There's a possibility, like with any clan situation, the progenitor after whom the clan is named could have been born at the beginning of the clan, starting the clan, in the proper progenitor sense, which is, you got a new dynamic, powerful figure that rises up and establishes his new clan. Sort of like what Abraham does. But it's also possible that these things can happen at the end of the lineage of a clan too, where you have a very, very powerful person just before the clan destroys itself or divides or dies. And that particular individual is so important to the history of the clan that the whole clan is retrospectively named after him going back in time. So either one of those is a possibility, and it's hard to sometimes tell which one it is, to be perfectly honest. So in the case of Isaac and Jacob, it's hard to know. In the case of Isaac, it's really hard to know, because we don't know exactly how he relates to, say, the birth of Jacob. We have some clue here, but it could have been in the middle, it could have been at the end. It's really difficult to say. It's hard to know exactly direct patrimony as well. Like, for example, this is possible that Abraham, when he gives, he begets, Ishmael and Isaac. He begets them both. That the original person that he begot might not have been named Isaac. That's a possibility. That's a possibility we have to consider here. That person then becomes father of the Isaac, so that's becomes father of Jacob, etc. So it's really, really difficult to say. And then basically Abraham is given credit for being the father of Isaac, even though directly it's only an indirect parentage. Because in Israelite circles, your grandfather is your father, and your grandson is your son. And this is true all through the history of Israelite writing. So it's a very, very difficult thing to sometimes nail down exact relationships in, say, Hebrew genealogies. It's just very, very difficult. So there's a possibility. It could be two Isaacs. Possible. Nothing excludes it. It's also possible that they one of those members wasn't called Isaac and then given, say, retrospective credit for being called Isaac. It's also possible. So it's hard to know exactly which one it is. We don't have enough data here. So anyway, I hope that answered your question, at least as best as we can, given the lack of information. But anyway, I want to thank you very much for that very, very generous super chat. Very much appreciated. And it's a great question. I wish we had more data. If we had more data, then maybe we could narrow it down, but we don't at the moment. So we can always hope for more data. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Really, really appreciate it. Okay. Our next super chat here is from Mystery Flavor for $20. He says, in Genesis 30, 37 to 42, is Genesis 30, 37 to 42, intended to be understood as sympathetic magic or a unique miracle of God? What are the implications of both, seeing as it obviously worked? Okay, let's take a look at the passage and find out. So Genesis 30, verse 37. Okay. Interesting. Okay, verse 36. We'll start there. And he put a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob. This is Laban, I bet. Okay, probably Laban. And Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. Then Jacob took fresh rods of poplar and almond and plane trees and peeled white stripes in them, exposing white which was in the rods. And he set the rods which he had peeled in front of the flocks in the gutters, even in the watering troughs where flocks came to drink, and they mated when they came to drink. So the flocks mated by the rods, and the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. Okay. And Jacob separated the lambs and made flocks to face towards the stripes, and all the black in the flock of Laban. And he put his own herds apart and did not put them with Laban's flocks. Moreover, when it came about, whenever the stronger of the flock were mating, that Jacob would place the rods in the sight of the flocks in the gutters, so that they might mate by the rods. But when the flock was feeble, he did not put them in, so the feebler were Laban's and the stronger Jacob's. Okay. What we have here is not only sympathetic magic, but applied pharmacology. Okay?
Practical chicanery.
Yeah, practical chicanery. Yeah, this is as much applied pharmacology as it is sympathetic magic. So, what is he doing here? He's ensuring that the strongest flocks, the most attractive flocks, are mating. Okay? And he's using the rods. And it says in verse 38. Let's see, 37? Yeah, okay. Took fresh rods of poplar and almond and plane trees and peeled white stripes in them, exposing the white which was in the rods. And he set the rods which he had peeled in front of the flocks in the gutters, even in the watering troughs. This is important. This is an important detail. Okay? Because one of the things that you find in bark is alkaloids. Okay? One of the most famous of these alkaloids is aspirin. Okay? These alkaloids improve the health of animals and people alike. So, there's some interesting alkaloids in these barks. So he's sticking this wood that's been stripped of its bark into the drinking water of these flocks, and they're mating. Some are producing very, very beautiful, white lambs. Some are producing all black, less desirable, much less desirable. And he's separating them. He's separating the less desirable to be Laban's flocks, the weaker to Laban's flocks, and the stronger, he's breeding. He's intentionally breeding. And he's only doing it so that he's doing these rods in such a way that it promotes the strong and the beautiful. So he's using applied pharmacology. And, it's not immediately obvious, but yeah, there might be a sympathetic magic component to it as well. But there's also an applied pharmacological component also. And I think that is exceptionally interesting. So, yeah. I mean, we still do this. We still do this today. You want to raise chickens that are larger, healthier than other chickens. Feed them tetracycline. Feed them antibiotics. One of the things that we know, like from raising cattle and chickens, is if you treat them with antibiotics, they don't get sick as much. If they don't get sick as much, they grow bigger. Because sickness limits the size of your growth. You can do the same thing with other phytochemicals as well. So, anyway, fascinating little piece of history here. So, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And as I said, very, very interesting question. And as I said, some not just magic, applied pharmacology. Okay. Our let's see. So hopes that comes up soon. Okay, I have to stop and restart this. It stopped, responding. So just a second here. Yeah. Pretty quick widget here. Ooh. Clobbered all my super chats. Okay, oh, I had to restart Twidget. This still my super chat, so we're gonna have to probably cut and paste a lot of these. But anyway, I saw this comment by Warrior of the Most High. How do you know these things, Dr. Falk? I'm a very curious person. I also have a very, very broad education. My undergrad, half my undergrad was in the sciences, so I did two years of my undergrad program in biochemistry. So that's how I know that particular thing. But I'm very, very curious. Very, very curious. I read widely. So for me, stuff like this is just, fascinating. It's just fascinating. I'm very, I mean, there's things I just, I want to know. I want to learn. So for me, I try to pick up new skills, and new, interesting, little tidbits of knowledge here and there. So for me, this is, this for me is just, as I said, part of being a curious person. Oh, and I don't own television. I don't watch in the way of movies. I don't have a Netflix subscription. So I can be very, very ignorant about, say, things like current events or movies and that sort of thing. But that also affords me the time to really, really explore things that interest me. So that's how I know these things. Okay, let me go find it.
So you're cutting
Yeah, I'm gonna have to cut and paste. Looks
the
like.
next one.
Okay, let me see if I can find it here. Okay. Any chance at all bringing it back? Nope. All right. So we are going to cut and paste here. All right. Cam Britt will be next here, so I'm going to cut and paste this. Fortunately, we do have a workaround to some extent. Okay, so what's happening is I use a software to pull up superchats into OBS. However, it doesn't always work well. It'll sometimes stop and freeze. And that is a problem. So in those cases, what I have to do is I have to go in and cut and paste to show the super chat, which is, it's a workaround. It's not convenient, but it is a workaround. Turn off widget here, and our next super chat here is from Cam Britt for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay. And he asks, was the birth of Ruth's son miraculous, and could Ruth 14 to 15 be a messianic prophecy of what? With a redeemer being born in Bethlehem and of David. Okay. Let's bring up Ruth and let's find out what you mean by that, because I don't think that's miraculous for some reason. Ruth, chapter 4, 14 to 15. Okay, 14. We'll start 13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went in to her. And the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. And the woman said to Naomi, Blessed is the Lord, who has not left you without a redeemer today. And may his name become famous in Israel. May he also be to you a restorer of life and sustainer of your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and is better than 7 sons, has given birth to him. Okay. Yeah, there is a messianic aspect to this. But one can say that too of the seed of the woman too in Genesis 3:15. So there is a redeemer aspect to this. Now, I'll say this though. It's not a miraculous birth. It's not a miraculous birth. Now, contrary to what most people think about the story of Ruth, she's not a young woman. David C. Cook always portrays her as a young woman. She's not. She's in her 30s. Okay? Yeah, that's gonna kill a lot of sacred cows for a lot of people. Because
I think she's young.
my producer says I think she's young. Yeah, Ruth has already had one marriage and two children that died. She's not a spring chicken. She's a widow. She's a widow. She's basically near the end of her reproductive years. She's in her 30s. Boaz is in his 50s. You know, this is a more of a business transaction marriage than it is love at first sight. This is not romantic. This is good business. I mean, the courtship here is more like, oh, this marriage makes sense. Let's get married. Okay. That can be a really realistic thing to do sometimes. Really realistic. You know, a good match is a good match in this culture. You know, where survival depends upon it. So it's not miraculous. It is definitely within the confines of normal childbirth. Maybe the most miraculous thing is that she married at age 30. You know. I mean, She's not a spring chicken. She's not a spring chicken.
She's a widow.
She's a widow. And she's not a spring chicken. So, yeah.
But she's already had two.
She's already had two children, yes. So, as far as Boaz is concerned, he's marrying somebody who's wise. Okay? He's marrying a woman who's wise. And he can see that. He can see what he's got there. So, it's... And I know, as I say, that's going to kill a whole lot of sacred cows, and people are probably going to be upset with me that I said that about her, because, you know, this is against the prevailing culture of how we interpret this passage. But I think this is really... and we have to also understand that, to address the second part of your question here, Messianic prophecy with a Redeemer being born in Bethlehem and of a David. Yeah, well, indeed, because Ruth is the great-grandmother of King David. So absolutely, this is part of that line of Jesse. And as we know, Messiah comes from the line of David. So ultimately, Redeemer will have come from the line of Ruth and Boaz. And we see, like an example in verse 17 here. And the neighbor woman gave him a name, saying, "A son has been born to Naomi." So they named him Obed. He is the father of Jesse, the father of David. So, but there's also the other interesting thing about this passage as well, which I think is really, really fascinating. Ruth is a Moabite. She's a Moabite. The Torah law says a son of a Moabite cannot enter into the assembly for 10 generations. And yet David does. After just 4. That's fascinating right there. That God extended grace to David to allow him and his posterity to be entered into the assembly of the Israelites. So there's a lot of interesting stuff in this passage. So anyway, I think that sort of covers the meat of this. Anyway, I want to thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. And great question. Okay. The next one here is from the Camelopard. I'll have to cut and paste this one too. Okay. Let's see here, next one. Ooh, the Camelopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Gaius Octavius asks, could you explain monarchical trinitarianism and what is the monarchy of what the monarchy of the Father is? Wow, that's going to get deep fast. Okay. Monarchical trinitarianism is the idea that you have the Trinity, the 3 persons of the Trinity, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, but there's a hierarchy in that Trinity. Okay? They are equal in substance, but not necessarily in rank. Some have called this subordinationism, but it isn't really. The whole idea is that between the 3 persons of the Trinity, that the Father was elected to lead the Trinity as the Father. So that's generally what's meant by the monarchical trinitarianism. Now, monarchical monotheism is the idea that you have not just, say, this God, the existence of God, but the existence of many minor deities and subordinate spirits as well. So that's the monarchical aspect, is that the Trinity is not alone. It's not alone. But monarchical trinitarianism is the idea that amongst, say, the Trinity, there is one person who has a higher in rank, but even though the substance of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit are equal and the same, one is just elected by the other two to lead, or to act in the role of the Father and Judge, etc. So it's more a matter of who's been put in that position. Now, this is different than say subordinationism, where you have say the Father who is in that position of being the monarch because of he is spinning off the substance of the Son, and then spinning off the substance of the Holy Spirit. I think this is an absolutely monarchical Trinitarianism is a correct approach as far as it's the idea that the position of the Father is elected by the other two members of the Trinity. But then again, I'm an Athanasian Trinitarian as well, which means I believe that all three persons of the Trinity existed before the beginning of time. So, in order for me to reconcile the whole idea that there's a Father, Son, and a Holy Spirit, I have to also say that the members of the Trinity came to a quorum to anoint or appoint one to the Father to be the head of the Trinity. So I hope that answers the question. I thank you very much for that super chat. Very, very much appreciated. It's not a question I go into very deeply very often because I'm not usually engaged in questions about Trinitarianism. But it is I think it's an important issue too, that we understand that just because you have a Trinity doesn't explain all the interactions within the Trinity. So I think it's important to engage these questions as well, because once you've engaged them, you can sort of say, okay, this is how it could have possibly shaken out. Oh, and also thank you to the Camelopard for sponsoring another person's question. We do really, really like when people do that. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat, and thank you for sponsoring another user's question, subscriber's question. Thank you very, very much. Okay, the next one here. Oh. Oh dear. Yeah, okay. Need to cut and paste. Okay. Our next super chat here is from Ryan Naylor for $20. Thank you very much for the super chat. Correspondence between Doug Petrovich and my 14-year-old son. Why were the Israelites not wiped out in the 14th or 13th century? Nobody had A, the balls, and or B, the brawn? Have you done the Amarna letters? Ooh. Ooh. Oh. Ew. Yeah, this is inappropriate. Not surprising. I'm not actually not surprised by this reaction. Yeah. This is very Dougish. This is very much the way Petrovich will react to people who ask him. Ryan Naylor expounds on this, and I'm just going to take that. A little snippet from a much longer email response in which Doug derides my son for posing difficulties some learned from this channel. Well, I'll say this. Good on your son. Okay, that's awesome. That is awesome. You know, your son is learning enough to question. Good on you. Good on your son. A+ for good parenting. Okay.
And Doug just got bested by a 14-year-old.
Doug got bested by a 14-year-old. Even better. When Doug gets challenged by very, very difficult questions, he attacks the questioner. You know, I've seen this even do this to live audiences. You know, I've seen him do this to. I saw this in my 2017 debate with him. You know, somebody who was one of his fans, you know, asked, "Hey, you know, Falk has raised an important objection. You know, you should probably answer that question." And you know, Petrovich just turns on the guy and goes, "Oh well, why are you taking Falk's side on this?" Well, he wasn't taking my side.
He was saying if you don't want to look stupid, you need to answer.
He was just saying it's a good question. You know, what's your answer? So, wow. Ryan continues here. He's 16 now and regularly corresponds with higher quality scholars. Laugh out loud. Well, good for him. Good for him. That is so cool. That's awesome. And you know what? Scholars love to get these things. You know, because frankly, this is our life's work. This is what we pour our passion into. This is what we pour our focus, our study, our energy. So when we get these questions, you know, from you know, ordinary people, as it were, you know, it's an opportunity for us to share. So this is fantastic. I think this is wonderful news. This is just excellent. It's encouraging to see children being raised to question the faith, or what they're being told, to build up their faith so it's stronger, more resistant. I'm just thrilled. I'm just tickled pink by all this. This is fantastic.
Plans on studying Assyriology? Yes.
Ooh, thanks to you. Well, it's my deepest honor. My deepest honor to do that. Help out. I mean, that's all I'm doing here is helping. He plans to study Assyriology. Awesome. Wow. He'll love it. He'll absolutely love it. Assyriology's awesome. It really is. So, wow. This is just really encouraging. Really, really encouraging. Just ignore Doug. Just ignore him. Yeah, he does this to everyone. He's not gracious to those who question him. Yeah. And you know, he'll even do this to guys like Alan Millard. You know, scholars that are much bigger giants in the field than he ever will be. So, you know, if he does that, then historical strategy gaming. A powerful Sith he shall become.
Ryan's son is watching.
I have to agree. Ryan's son will become a very, very powerful Sith. He's off to an excellent start. And, yeah. Right. Millard is the man. I was a student of Daniel Block. Okay, awesome. I'm actually friends with Millard because I studied under Ken Kitchen. Millard and Kitchen are good friends. They're very good friends, very close friends. So I got to see Millard all the time when I was in England. Wonderful man. wonderful man. Great um, defender of the faith. Great defender of the faith. I have nothing but the highest respect for Al Millard. And he is all that. Yeah, he is definitely all that. So if your son can turn out like Alan Millard, you've won. You've raised a great soldier for the faith. So I want to thank you very much for that super chat. Very much appreciate it, and it's really encouraging to hear this about your son. And just keep encouraging him. Just keep encouraging him. It's a hard road. It's a hard road, but it's worth it in the end. Okay. Next one here will be from Lion Green. Okay. And okay, and okay, the next one here is from Lion Green. After $5, thank you very much for the super chat. Okay, what kind of grave goods were ancient Israelites buried with? Does this reflect pagan beliefs about the afterlife? Ooh. Well, that's an interesting question. Because some of this will really depend upon when we are talking about here. Early Israelite graves had more grave goods, and mostly pots full of food and stuff. We're not exactly sure why they did that religiously. Later on, it's just the body. Like in the post-exilic period, they're just burying the body. They'll put them in these limestone tombs, which will cause rapid decomposition, and in a year's time, there's nothing left but bones, and those bones will then be collected into ossuary boxes. So that's sort of the burial style that we find during, say, the Second Temple period. But during the First Temple period, we find other kinds of burials. We do find burials with some grave goods like dishes, bowls, urns. There's also some evidence too of cremation, especially amongst kings. A lot of the kings of Israel were cremated. They weren't buried. This is one of the reasons we don't find many tombs of Israelite kings. Like, we don't find any. It's the fact that they didn't bury the whole body. They usually cremated it on funerary pyres. So there's differences in burial practices that stretch over time. But in the case of, say, early Israelite graves, they do seem to be more similar to other Semitic kinds of burials. So they tend to be a kind of a brick vaulted burial with grave goods. Usually a small number of grave goods, maybe a sacrificed animal, that sort of thing. So that's sort of reflective of the kind of grave goods we find in early Israelite graves. And we don't know, it does reflect that they had some belief about an afterlife. Does this mean that it had the same connotation as, say, pagan beliefs? Like, for example, the reason why, for example, the Egyptians buried people with grave goods is because they thought the dead would starve in the afterlife. They needed food to get them to the next destination. It's unclear if the Israelites thought the same thing, or why they specifically, buried a person with grave goods. We're not exactly sure of the Israelite justification for this. Whether it's just something they picked up along the way, or if it's something that they really thought about as they did it. We don't know. We don't honestly know why they did this. In the case of the Egyptians, we know why. They left us lots of text to tell us why they did it. Israelites, not so clear. It's not so clear. And there was a change in practice, as I said. So, hard to say, really. It's hard to say. It could be an influence of pagan belief. It could be just that's the way they've always done it. You know, we have to understand that an awful lot of burial customs are just based upon that's the way we've always done it. Like, for example, you know, we look at, say, North American burial practices. Why do we use a hearse? Why do we go to a funeral home, do a visitation of the body? Because a Ford pickup truck would be a little tacky. You know, you load the body into a casket, you put it into the back of a hearse, and you drive it slowly on parade to the cemetery. Why do we do that? Well, it's a throwback to burial practices in the 19th century. You know, where they put it into a long stagecoach. You know, they had a special stagecoach for this purpose, and you put the body in the back of the stagecoach, you horse and buggy it to the cemetery. We just updated it. Instead of using a horse and buggy, we're now using a limousine. You know, why do we use cemeteries instead of, say, our local plot in the backyard? You know, there's a lot of these traditions that are in our burial customs that, you know, really don't make a lot of sense practically, but it's the way we've always done it, or at least we think it's been always done that way. You know, that's
something with good marketing convinced us years ago.
Yeah. You know, so there's a lot to these things that are just sort of the result of you know, just the way people do things, that they don't really think about it all that much. And I think this is one of those things where I think that the Israelites are burying people with grave goods without really thinking about the implications of why they're doing it that way. And this is particularly true on stuff that is sort of more cultural than, say, theological. Yeah, we do the same thing, though. Yeah, as my producer points out, you know, we often, you know, bury the dead with mementos. You know, lockets, trinkets, baby teeth. You know, there's, you know, mourning cards of mourning. You know, little messages. Yeah, we dress the dead in their favorite clothes, whether they think they look nice. You know, none of this stuff is going to serve the dead in the afterlife. Honestly, you know, they're not going to look at your silver locket from great grandma. You know, they're just. But we do this for emotional reasons and because it's cultural. So yeah, I think we have to be a little understanding of them. I mean, you know, they're not thinking so theologically when they're doing this, burying the grave goods with their dead. They're thinking emotionally, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just we have to understand that this is just the sensitivity of the human condition. So anyway, I think it's a great question. Thank you very much for the super chat, and I hope that helped. Okay. Okay, I see a $10 super chat here from, I'm going to thank him for this, but I'm going to just, because I have to cut and paste it, I'm just going to take the question. Okay. Our next super chat is from Moise Salazar for $10. Now, he had placed a $10 super chat, but without a question, but he has another question below it, so we're going to take that question. So anyway, I want to thank you very much for that super chat, and tell you I very, very much appreciate it. Okay, and he asks, when the Enuma Elish succeeded to be told, it was after or before the Israelites' exile in Babylon. Enuma Elish was told, it was written down before the Babylonian exile. Okay, so it does predate Israel. I don't remember exactly by how much off the top of my head, but as I recall, it's at least 500 years older than the Israelite exile. So when the Israelites end up going to Babylon, they've already have in all likelihood been exposed to the Enuma Elish. So that's the simple answer to the question. Is that it's one of those older pieces of creation literature. So I do believe it is Bronze Age, but I can't remember how old it is. I'd have to look that up. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. So it's a very interesting. Enuma Elish is a very interesting work. I do highly recommend reading it, especially if you want to sort of understand the whole sort of intertextuality of Genesis, because the intertextuality here is it's going to Genesis is in many ways are going to be focused on, say, the anti-myth that we find in things like the Enuma Elish. So if you view the Enuma Elish on that level, that Genesis is actually responding to the Enuma Elish, not copying it, it makes a whole lot more sense. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Oh no, I didn't. That's the problem with doing this by hand. Is you do. Okay. We will not forget it though. Okay. Okay. Okay, the Camel Leopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat, and sorry for skipping this. What, in your most speculative opinion, and this is going to be speculative, do you think the Star of Bethlehem was? All right. Here's what I think the Star of Bethlehem was. I think it was a conjunction that happened, possibly a comet, that occurred within a certain constellation that is then being referenced against an interpretation book. That's what I think it is. Because when people did dream interprtations, astronomy, episcopy, which is, you basically slaughter an animal and look at the organs, they didn't do this willy-nilly. They didn't do this willy-nilly. I had a piece of text from Mesopotamia, a copy of it, and you open it up, and it's basically a set of interpretations for animal, basically reading the organs of a sacrificed animal, and it's very specific. That's very specific. So. And astrology was no different. Astrology and dream interpretation was no different, which is they had these guidebooks that basically told them how to interpret certain things. So I think what the Star of Bethlehem was it was a stellar phenomena that happened inside a certain constellation, and that conjunction of the planets or the comet inside the constellation directed them to an interpretation in one of their dream book or in one of their interpretation books. And that's what led them to Jerusalem first and then to Bethlehem. Okay? So That, in my speculative opinion, is what the Star of Bethlehem is. I don't think necessarily people could have looked up in the sky and saw something all that compelling. But if you're sort of reading the tea leaves of the stars, yeah, you might notice it. And this is what the Magi did, was they were reading the tea leaves in the stars. They were astrologists. So they're seeing some phenomena, they're comparing it to what their book of interpretation says, and then they're acting on that. So that is my opinion of what the Star of Bethlehem was. Not something spectacular. I mean, I've heard people say it was like a supernova and something like that. I don't necessarily think that. It could have been a supernova, but I don't think it necessarily was a supernova. It could have been very, very difficult to see. That's very possible. Yeah, I've heard that might be a conjunction of Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, and that sort of thing. So I've heard that too, or Jupiter and Venus. I've heard that as well. Or yeah, Jupiter and Venus. But I don't think that's necessarily the case. I don't think it's necessarily the case, and it lasts long enough for them to get to Jerusalem. It lasts long enough for them to get to Jerusalem. So I think that there's a lot here that there's nothing here that says that the star was bright or popped out at you. Okay, there's nothing saying that. All it says is that they read the stars and that's where it led them. It didn't have to be a big star to lead them there. It could have been just a little one, barely noticeable except to an astrologer and his interpretation book. So that's my speculation. I don't typically like to speculate, but that's my speculation regarding the Star of Bethlehem. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that provided you a little insight. Okay. And wow. Very generous super chat here. Next. Very good. Paste this one. Okay. Our next super chat here is from Koheliful for $199.99. Wow. Wow. What a generous super chat. And he says, Merry Christmas, Dr. Falk. Well, Merry Christmas to you. Thank you for your ministry. You have helped to strengthen both faith and knowledge. God bless. Well, God bless you too. Thank you so very much for this really generous super chat. You've been very generous tonight. This is your second super chat of the night. First you did the one for 50 and now $200. And wow, that's very, very generous. We are so grateful for your support. It really does help us a lot to have supporters like you help us to basically continue to answer questions and build people's faith. And that's why we're here. That's why we're here. That's our mission, is to answer questions, build people's faith, help people become interested and fascinated in the ancient Near East and the Bible. We want to get people back to reading the Bible, to really studying it, and really sort of squeezing the Bible for what it will give them. And we are just really, really excited when it helps people. And we are so humbled when we get such generous support like this from you and from others that really help us to do this. So I want to again I want to thank you very much for this super chat. Very, very much appreciated, and it really does help. Thank you so very much. Okay, I'm going to the next one. Okay, you can go. Okay. Next cut and paste here. Oh. Okay, our next super chat is from your Eshafra for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. I came across a claim by someone who posits that Jesus is a myth invented by Christians by stealing from ancient Egyptian beliefs. What are your thoughts in response to such a quote hypothesis? Oh, 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 ow, ah. I don't have much respect for mythicists. I just don't. Um, I think mythicism boils down to really really lazy thinking. Honestly, um, in fact, we are probably going to be doing another popcorn review in the not too distant future that may or may not take a look at a particular mythicist position. But the idea that Christians stole ideas from ancient Egyptian beliefs is preposterous. It is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, there's just no other way to put it. It's lazy thinking. It's not supported by data. You really have to stretch these Egyptian beliefs to a ridiculous extreme to try to make these connections. I mean, it's stupid. I mean, it's really, really dumb. Even guys like even atheists like Bart Ehrman think it's dumb. You know, if you've got like Bart Ehrman ragging on Richard Carrier in his position, I mean, it's not going to be good. Okay, it can't be good because Bart Ehrman does not like Christians. He doesn't. He does not like. He does not care for Christian ideas, and he certainly does not believe that Jesus is the Messiah. But he does believe that Jesus was a historical person, not a myth. So I think the whole Jesus is a myth thing is just a terrible. It's terrible history. It's terrible history. It's terrible study of ancient religions. It's methodologically bankrupt. It's methodologically bankrupt. So that's my thoughts. I just don't have anything good to say about mythicists. I have nothing good to say about them. They're lazy thinkers. They're incredibly lazy thinkers. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very very much appreciated, and that was my insight. Yep. Okay. All right, we're back to the Twidget again. All right. All right. Our next super chat is for $5 from the Camelopard, and he asks, "How would Moshe's name have been pronounced in Egyptian?" Ooh, great question. Would it have been Mshi or pronounced more like Moshe? Okay. It would have been pronounced probably along the lines of Mshe. Now, there are two competing views on the name of Moshe. The typical one in most Egyptologist circles is that it comes from the word mess, to be born or begotten from. I don't take that view. I do take the view that it is from a theophoric name, Mshe. Basically, it's the owl and the pool ideogram in Egyptian, and it means from the pool, from the water. So that's a really, really good comparison to Moshe, and plus the consonants are right too. So it would have been pronounced somewhat along the lines of Mshe. So, like for example, Amen Mshe. So that's really how it would have probably been pronounced. So if you lop off the theophoric element of Amun, or Montu, or whatever it happens to be, you do get Mshe or Moshe. So it would be very similar to Moshe. Very, very similar to how it is pronounced in Hebrew. So I think that sort of adds credibility to this as well, is that the pronunciation between Moshe and Mshe is so close that is more likely than not. So anyway, I want to thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and I hope that helped. How many? Ooh. Next super chat is from Sentinel Apologetics for $2 Australian. Hi Rob, how's it going? Good to see you here tonight. Merry Christmas, Daddy Falk. Well, Merry Christmas to you too. I don't know how I lucked out, but I actually get Christmas Eve and Christmas Day off this year, so I'm really looking forward to this weekend. So it's not normal that I get 2 days off in a row. So for me, I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled to be able to have this time off. I didn't ask for it. My employer just decided to give it to me, so it's a pleasant change. So I'm very happy about being able to not have to work tomorrow and be able to be home to actually celebrate Christmas. So I hope you're well. I hope things are going good for you over there. Again, we talked about a little bit about doing a collaboration, and I think we should readdress that in the new year, because I think a collaboration would be good again. We need to do another one of those. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated, and have a very Merry Christmas, and I'll talk to you again in the new year. Next one here is from Michael Eterno for $5 Canadian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Merry Christmas, David. Can you elaborate on what cursing your parents means? Oh, yes. Okay. What is cursing your parents? This is not using dirty language against your parents. Okay? This is not using bad words or impolite or rude words or dirty words against your parents. Cursing your parents is wishing them death or poverty or misfortune. It's putting a curse on your parents. That's what it is. In a magical sense. Okay? That's what it is. And the idea here is that if you publicly say you wish your parents were dead, you're actually, in a sense, enacting that as a magical formula. So, this is not being angry at your parents. This is not saying something nasty or rude to your parents. This is wishing them death and harm. It's quite literally wishing harm upon your parents. That's what cursing your parents means. Okay? And the other thing about this as well is this is not a law against minors. I think it's really important because this is an extension of you shall honor your father and mother. An extension of the Ten Commandments. The idea of that that commandment, is this a commandment that's really focused on adults? These are adult children. The idea of cursing your parents is it's a command that is focused again upon adults, not necessarily minors, not immature children. Okay? Because, like for example, the commandment to honor your father and mother. Well, dependent children are incapable of honoring their father and mother. Honoring means that you're going to take care of them in their old age. Honoring means that you're not going to leave your parents destitute when the chips are down for them. Honoring means that you're not going to wish them harm, that you want the best for them. So this all has to do with adults. These laws have to do with adults. Cursing your parents, wishing them dead to collect the inheritance. That's an example of cursing your parents. Helping the process along a bit. We do see this. Even today. There's adult children today who try to accelerate the demise of their parents to collect the inheritance. You don't feed them right. You don't give them proper medications. You abuse them. That's cursing your parents. So, yeah, it's very, very. It's, as I said. I think the worst thing about this is it's too often applied to minor children, and it has nothing generally. I mean, yes, you do get some evil children that will, knock off their parents, but it's generally for adult children. That's what these commandments are primarily focused towards, is adults. So it's adult children cursing their adult parents. That's what it means. So anyway, I hope that puts some enlightenment here. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. And I hope you have a very, very Merry Christmas. And thank you for joining us tonight. Okay. We got another super chat here from Zeobeo for €11. Thank you very much for the super chat. Fell asleep. Am late. Well, you know what? It is late. Honestly, it is late. We had to start the live stream tonight at 8:30 because my boss kind of extended my hours. This is sort of the Christmas season, so everyone's working a bit later. But he says, regarding Hebrew being Canaanite, can Israel's proximity to Egypt explain more loanwords? No, it can't really. How about having ruled the territory before gets compared to Spain or an Arabic rule? Okay, I've heard this argument said. I've heard Josh Bowen use this sort of argument, and it falls flat for a few reasons. Okay, it falls flat because we do know that there are some places that the Egyptians ruled quite vigorously, quite with a lot of strength, like Ugarit. That region was very heavily controlled by the Egyptians. Yet we don't see the loanwords infiltrate their language. So the other thing too is the control over the territory of Canaan by the Egyptians was more of a hegemony. And I've explained this before in other videos, where people confuse the idea between empire and hegemony. Egypt didn't have an empire. Egypt did not have absolute control over Canaan. Egypt had a hegemony. They basically had set up a few garrison towns to show that, yeah, they're there to stay. But they didn't assert direct control over Canaan itself. They were really just there to collect tribute. As long as the little tribal chieftains and chiefs of the city-states paid their tribute, Egypt didn't care one way or the other how they behaved. They let those guys go to war against each other, and Egypt just sat by and looked as long as they got their tribute. So, one of the things we have to understand about the garrison towns in in Canaan, is that the garrison towns were kind of insular. They're very insular. They didn't go out much beyond the confines unless they had to. Garrison towns were really places to collect tribute, to provide some accounting and administration. It was also a place where, when the king went on campaign, he could sort of, stop at these towns, have the whole army stop at the towns as sort of rest stops. Like we know, for example, Beit Shean was an Egyptian garrison town. And one of the things we know is when the Israelites conquered Canaan, they didn't conquer Beit Shean. But what happened to Beit Shean was it also became more and more isolated, as the Israelites gained further and further control over Canaan. The remaining Egyptian garrison towns became more and more insular, more and more isolated, more and more withdrawn to themselves. And the Exodus and the conquest takes place after basically more or less Egypt loses its hegemonic control. So it really doesn't explain the loanwords then. Because, okay, Hebrew is a Semitic language, Canaanite is a Semitic language, but it's not the same Semitic language. And they have different trajectories. So with Israel coming in from the outside, we should expect some more Egyptian vocabulary inside of Canaan if it was just the hegemony that caused the proliferation of loanwords. So I don't think the hegemony alone explains this. You need more. Just because of the way Egypt controlled its territory. So anyway, I hope that helps answer the question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Yeah, I've heard Josh Bowen make this argument, and it just doesn't hold water when you really start examining the details. Also, the fact is that some of those loanwords too are date and time specific. So, with that said, it's so for example, there's some of them that are specific to the Egyptian New Kingdom. So if this is Canaanite, and it is about, say, hegemonic control, you would have probably some differences too in what words would gravitate to the text other than what actually appears there. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated, and I hope that helped. Okay, we've got BC for $2 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Were the three Magi Israelite exiles or Gentiles? Ooh. We're not sure. They are probably Zoroastrian. And they are probably Gentiles, in all likelihood. There's some possibility they could have been Israelite exiles. That's possible. They could have been Israelite exiles from, say, even the northern tribes. Ones that had been deported earlier by the Assyrians. But at that point, were they really Israelites anymore? The text doesn't tell us. The text honestly doesn't tell us. It does seem to almost assume they're Gentiles. But, again, we're not sure. We're just not sure. The text is silent on this. And where the text is silent, it's safest always to be silent ourselves. So, that's about all we can say about them. We know very little about them. We know that they were astrologers. We know that they are from the East. So, most likely from Persia. Oh, yeah, we know they got an angelic vision, yeah. But that's after. That's after they visit Herod. Yeah, they're in a pretty rarefied club with an angelic vision. That's for sure. But we don't know much more than that. The Bible doesn't amplify this. So anyway, that's all we got on them, really. We know they gave 3 gifts. Okay. This also doesn't mean that there's three wise men or 3 magi, just 3 gifts. We don't know how many of them there were. There could have been many more. There could have been many less. Or a few less. Who knows? But we know there's more than one of them. We don't know how many of them, though. And we do know that they are on the incense road. Okay, that's also something we know because of the nature of their gifts. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh. For the frankincense and myrrh, they would have had to have been on the trade route of the incense trade. So that would have gone from Africa into Canaan and up into Mesopotamia and ultimately probably as far as India. So that is, they would have had to have been on that incense trade route for them to have access to those particular gifts, particularly the frankincense and myrrh. So that's about all I can say about this. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that helped. Really, really important question from the Camilla part for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Is Mr. Empty Conjecture's first name Empty, or does he have a double surname? Ooh, expand the lore. Wow, that is a good question. Never thought about that. A double surname. Yeah, I think it's a double surname. I don't know what his first name is. So, wow. Never thought about this. Yeah, it would be a double surname. So that's what I'm gonna stick to. The Empty Conjecture is a double surname. So maybe we'll have a contest for what his first name should be. Who knows? Or maybe we'll come up with one as part of the lore. So, fascinating question. Thank you very much for the super chat, and you've just expanded the lore.
Mr. is first name.
Mr. is his first name. Mr. is his first name, like Mr. Big or Dr. Pepper. Okay, well, thank you very much for the super chat. That was funny. Okay. Wow. Another very, very generous super chat from Cole Walker for $100. Thank you so much for that really, really generous super chat. Wow, we're being blessed with Christmas blessings this time. Oh wow, thank you so much. And he says, "Merry Christmas, Dr. and Mrs. Falk." Well, Merry Christmas to you too. as I said, it's a great honor to be here and to help, answer some questions, to provide a little bit of insight into the Bible. And that's our mission. That's our mission, is to provide insight into the Bible, to be able to basically show people that, hey, there's some really good stuff in the Bible, and there's some good answers, some really good answers to these questions. So, the super chats like this really do help support our channel, and we really can't do it without support like this. So we're so appreciative of this help. We are so appreciative of your generosity. Thank you very much, and it really does help us. It helps put food on our table. Yes, I have a day job, but it doesn't cover everything. So, generosity like this really does help us, and we really appreciate it. Thank you so very much. Michael Eterno, and looks like it's our last super chat here. And once we're done this, we'll take some non-super chat questions before calling it a night. Michael Eterno for $5 Canadian asks, and thank you very much for that super chat. Is it possible that Adam and Eve were allegorical figurative? I don't like the term allegorical or figurative here. Because allegorical has sort of the implication built into it that they weren't real people. I prefer the term mythologized, or that they were part of mythohistory. Okay? Mythohistorical. That's probably the best way I'd put it, is mythohistorical. Now, what do I mean by that? They're mythohistorical. I think they were real people. I think Adam and Eve were real people. But I also think, too, that the story of Adam and Eve has been retold in a way that is supposed to be pedagogical. It's pedagogical. So it's supposed to teach something. It's supposed to teach something. You're not getting unvarnished history. You're getting history that's being told as didactic literature. It's supposed to teach you about sacred space, about the holiness of God, about the sinfulness of man. It's supposed to incorporate all these different religious concepts. So there is a sense in which Adam and Eve are interacting with God himself, and with angels and other beings. So it's not allegorical per se, and it's not necessarily figurative, but it's also not pure history either. It's somewhere in between. Yeah, it's meant to communicate deeper truths than just a secular history. Yeah, it's not a factual recounting of history. It's a theological recounting of history. That makes sense. It's meant to give you religious information that applies to the beginning of mankind and our core problem, which is, of course, sin. So I tend to shy away from allegorical and figurative interpretations. And I'm not a huge fan of allegory either, honestly. I have issues with allegorical methods of reading most things. I think allegory can be really poorly handled. It does lead to sloppy interpretation, lazy interpretation. So I know allegory is one of the historical methods of interpretation throughout the history of the Bible, but I don't care for it. I've never really cared for it. I don't like it as a category of interpretation. I mean, I think, you know, a text can have a literal interpretation. It can have a deeper meaning interpretation. It can have in some special cases, it can have an allegorical interpretation. You know, I think that all of that is definitely possible, but it's not one I would always default to. Like, I don't necessarily default to a literal interpretation all the time because I want the context to guide that. I want the context to tell me what how I should be reading the text. In the case of the narrative of Adam and Eve, the context is really telling me that this is theological literature. It's not allegorical, and it's not purely historical. It's between that those two realms of history and theology. And it's sort of meeting us in between. So, I mean, I suppose it could be possible. I don't think it's very likely. I don't think it's that plausible, especially given the fact that that there is that whole appeal to the idea that these people thought that they were writing a kind of history. It's a religious history, but it's a kind of history nonetheless. So, anyway, I hope that clarified the issue. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, that's the last super chat. We have gone for almost 3 hours now. I will take some non-super chats, and then we're going to call it a night. Because it would be lovely if I got to go to bed tonight. No, I'm not going to do a 6-hour super live stream. Okay. Let's scan this for some questions. So I'm going through the chat live chat, looking for questions. Ooh, okay, I'll take Dark Blades here. How many dirty socks does mythicism get? 10 dirty socks! Whole laundry basket of dirty socks. Oh yeah, mythicism is just so outside the academic mainstream. You know, it's kind of it's a combination between Henry Morris's Ver Review and Ron Wyatt's. You know, it's just like it's just so out there. It's just so out there. It's not even funny. So yeah, they get a laundry basket of dirty socks. Lots of dirty laundry there. But anyway, could not resist the question. Okay. Ooh. St. Roman, Mr. Empty Conjecture versus Trash Panda. Who are you putting money on? Yeah, there's a relationship there between Mr. Empty Conjecture and Trash Panda. So yeah, they're very much on the same wavelength with each other. So I don't think exactly that that they're competitors. They're not competitors. Oh, the Suicide Squad? Yeah, something like that. For those of you not familiar with Trash Panda, you know, we will have some subscribers here who are not familiar with Trash Panda. To learn about Trash Panda, you really have to go on our Discord server. I did write a piece of software for those who are not on our Discord server that basically puts comments in inappropriate places. And we call the Trash Panda. So if you want to learn about Trash Panda, you have to join us on the Discord server. So, but Saint Ronan here is on our Discord server, so he knows about Trash Panda. So anyway, thank you for the question. Okay, I'll take this question from Michael Luterno. Did the Egyptians booby trap their pharaohs' tombs, or is that just Hollywood fluff? That's mostly Hollywood fluff. There is one tomb that does have a legitimate booby trap. And I can't remember which one it is now. I think it is the Meidum pyramid that actually had a legitimate booby trap. It wasn't much of a booby trap, okay? But generally this is fluff. Part of the reason it's fluff is because tombs in the ancient world had public and private areas. The public areas were open to the public to come worship the king, provide food offerings, and and basically we do find, like, for example, right outside the temple of the mortuary temple of Menkaure, there's a little on the outside of that temple, outside the walls of that temple, is a little offering site, and I saw it when I was at Giza, and people used to present offerings to Menkaure, because outside the walls it wasn't part of the official cult, but it was a public area, and people would come and make offerings there. This is also why you have tombs divided into two sections. You have the section which has all the reliefs of his life, of the person's life. So you'll see what he did when he was alive, like if he fished, hunted. He'll have his official biography there. And then you've got the burial chamber on the inside, where the king or deceased was actually buried. The antechamber, which has the biography, that's public area. People were allowed to go in there and read it, and as I said, provided food offerings, venerate the king, etc. The burial chamber was private. It generally was more protected with curses than anything else. So, if you, like, for example, there's one tomb that says, if you enter this tomb in an unworthy manner, or an unclean and unworthy manner, may you be cursed. So you had stuff like that. But generally not booby traps. Many times they discovered pretty quickly, too, that booby traps were pretty ineffective. Because the fact is that a lot of tombs were just entered by tunneling. They didn't even bother finding the entrance. They just tunneled a new one. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah, many of these tombs had both the robbers who were related to the tomb builders building a tunnel at the same time as the original tombs were being built. So essentially, once the king was buried, the robbers only had to finish the tunnel to break in and steal all the stuff. So these booby traps were not effective. They just weren't effective because they were getting in by other means.
There's some kind of mummy or something that if you...
Not really. I mean, that's... Well, the curse of the mummy was actually an invention of the newspapers. Okay. The so-called curse of the mummy, especially during... was invented in the 1920s. Essentially, Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon had basically an exclusive relationship with the Times, which published photos of the of King Tut's tomb when it was being excavated. Now, the thing with King Tut's tomb is it was a sensation, absolute sensation, and the fact is though there were other newspapers that wanted in on that rage that didn't get any access. So one of these newspapers decided to write a piece that said that there was a curse to sort of drive people away from the tomb, to scare them about the tomb. So so it was entirely an invention of the newspapers. Fake news isn't new. People have been doing it forever. And that was a piece of fake news in the 1920s. So anyway, very, very interesting question. But yeah, the whole booby trap thing is just Hollywood fluff. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. Okay. Um. Hmm. I'll take Keeps Learning's question here. Is it possible that the Book of Job is just novel, fictional character in modern sense that wanted to teach us wisdom? I don't think so. Okay. Now, I'll say this about the Book of Job. I don't think it's an indigenous, a piece of literature that's indigenous to Israel. I think it was written outside of Israel. I think it was written in Aram and then brought into the canon of Israelite literature. So that's where I think the origin of the Book of Job comes from. But I also think too that it's based on a real person. I don't think it's a novel, first of all, because frankly, fiction had not been invented as a genre. It was not invented as a genre. So now you could make the claim as allegorical literature, maybe, but even that, we don't see extended long pieces of allegorical literature. We do see mythologized literature, like Gilgamesh, that we see, or myth of history, like, say, the Iliad. But we don't see that so much in, say, Israelite literature. The genre of fiction had not been invented. Now, they did have didactic literature, sure. And they weren't beyond changing things to make it fit a teaching agenda. That's certainly true. But they also did that too within a sort of a framework of say, narrative events. And I think the book of Job is, as I said, a kind of narrative events that really sort of resonated with people. Because it did show this one guy's struggle of trying to understand what was happening when his whole life had gone to complete crud. He had been faithful. It says, the Book of Job says, he was a good man. There was no servant like Job. None like him. Sacrificed even for the sins of his kids. He was a good dad. He was a good provider. He raised good children. His flocks flourished.
He did it. Good.
Yeah. I mean, he did it because he was obedient. And yet all this garbage happens to him. You know, he loses his kids. He loses his health. He loses his home. He keeps his nagging wife. Yeah, I think it's kind of ironic that that's the one thing he does get to keep. I'm on shaky ground now. Yeah, so my sense is that it's an account of, and frankly it is pointing to certain things and places that I think anchor it within a certain historical context as well. It does seem to be after the dissolution of the Mitanni Empire in northern Mesopotamia, as far south as Aram. It does seem to be within that sort of context of the Arameans. So, and Job himself, that name is not an Israelite name. So there does seem to be a certain context here that seems to indicate that these are events being played out within, say, that sort of, again, that mytho-history. So there's a core history here, but there's also interaction with the divine, done in poetic form, but again, that's very common. We do see a lot of true events that are written in poetry, like the Song of Deborah, true events written in poetry. The Song of Moses, true events done in poetry. And these are just, literary devices that are used to amplify the meaning of the literature. So I don't think it's a novel. Novels hadn't been invented yet. But I think it is mytho-history. So anyway, thank you very much for the question, and I hope that helped. Okay. Let's see. I'll take a couple more questions, and then we'll call it a night. Okay, I'll take that one. That's a good one. And then we'll take one more after this, and then we'll call it a night. Zeobeo asks, if Job was written outside of Israel, then was it really Yahweh that Job was worshipping? Yeah. Yeah. You should just leave it at that and keep you guessing. Okay, I won't do that. Well, here's the thing. There's a strong possibility that Yahweh was not exclusive to the Israelites to begin with. And that's a very interesting thing right there. Especially if you take the Kenite hypothesis, which I think has some good possibilities, that Yahweh originated in Midian, as far as being the first place where he was worshipped under the name Yahweh. And then Moses, living in Midian, encounters Yahweh and brings him back to the Israelites. As a result of the Kenite hypothesis, it has also been suggested that that both the Israelites and the Edomites may have been both worshiping Yahweh, and that the Edomites were, in a sense, Yahweh worshippers, even though, their main god was called Kus, but we don't know who Kus was. We don't know if that's a job title. We don't know if that's a functional title. We don't know if it's a name proper. We just don't know. So there's a strong possibility that already in the late Bronze Age, Yahweh was not restricted to Israel, but included Edom as well. And if that's the case, then it is possible that others outside, the so-called righteous Gentiles, this is what's in theology called the righteous Gentiles, are worshiping God, just not under the name of Yahweh. The same way that Abraham would have been worshiping Yahweh as El Elyon or El Shaddai. Abraham would not have been worshiping Yahweh as Yahweh. Even though there is some text that retroactively inject that name back into his dialogue, in all likelihood, Abraham and the patriarchs were worshiping El Shaddai and El Elyon. They weren't directly worshiping Yahweh. So in that same sense, then, Job is not worshiping Yahweh directly. He is worshiping El. He's worshiping the God, the great God, whoever that is. And of course, if you do that, worshiping the great God, whoever it is, then that will lead you to Yahweh ultimately. Just because you are worshiping according to the characteristics that Yahweh has, even if you don't know him by his proper name. So, I'd say yes. Even if Job was written outside of Israel, that does not preclude him from having worshipped Yahweh, even if it's not by that name specifically. So, anyway, I hope that answered the question. Thank you very much for the question. An interesting question. It's a very interesting question. And it leads to some very interesting issues, such as, can you worship God without knowing his name? And I think the answer here is yes. Absolutely. BC points out the comment, remembering also that Melchizedek, the high priest of Salem, under Jerusalem, is likely a Christophany. So even in Canaan early days, Yahweh worship was going down at the time of Abraham or earlier. Now, in the case of Melchizedek, I don't think he was a Christophany, but he is a type of Christ. He's a type of Christ. He was a high priest and a king. He was a high priest and a king. He was king of Salem. So we have to recognize too here that, Melchizedek was probably not worshiping Yahweh by name. Melchizedek basically says he's worshiping El Shaddai or El Elyon. That's who Melchizedek says he's worshiping, is El Elyon. He's not calling him by Yahweh. So, Melchizedek is basically being honored by Abraham, as a faithful priest and king. Somebody who's worthy to receive the tithe from Abraham. And yet he's worshiping El Elyon. So Melchizedek is a perfect example of a righteous Gentile. He's a righteous Gentile that is also becomes a type of Christ. So it's a great example. It's a great example. Okay, so thank you very much for that question. Appreciate that. I'm going to take one more non-super chat, and then we're going to call it a night, because we have now gone past 3 hours. Okay. I'm going to go back to the beginning here if I can. And the same rule applies. If I don't find something here that floats my boat, we'll just call it a night. Ooh, culinary question. Okay, I think we'll make this the last one for the night. It's a personal question, but you know what? I like this question. Historical strategy gaming. What is planned for Christmas dinner? Okay. What we're doing for Christmas dinner is turkey. Okay? I like turkey. I like turkey a lot. No, I don't do the Norman Rockwell turkey. I don't do the whole bird. I cook my turkey very, very different than most people. Okay? I essentially carve it up like a chicken. I Yeah, I mean I basically dismantle my turkey before cooking it. I basically chop it up into basically pieces, the same way like you would dismantle a whole chicken for frying. And I cook the pieces individually because I don't basically I want my turkey to be evenly cooked and tender. So I dismantle all the bird, lay it on a tray, and just cook it evenly. At the same time, I and the meat comes out perfectly. It's baked in. I mean, and I can cook a whole turkey in less than an hour, unless I want to slow cook it. If I slow cook it, I can just keep it. I can have it going. I've done that too sometimes, where I've taken a turkey, dismantled it, and then slow cooked it over several hours, like 5, 6 hours, and that's really good too. So, it's going to be turkey. I'm going to also do dressing. Basically, I have a recipe for bread stuffing that I just put in a piece of tin foil and cook it on the side. And then we do mashed potatoes, gravy, and cranberry. And that's going to be Christmas dinner. So, um, Christmas dinner without eggnog. Well, if we wanted to, we could make eggnog. I mean, eggnog's actually not that hard to make. Funny enough, you make some custard, in a liquid form, and then add whipping cream to it, and some nutmeg, and you got a really good eggnog. Yes, definitely liquid custard when done right. Oh yeah, homemade eggnog, fabulous. Now, don't get the commercial stuff. I mean, that's all high fructose corn syrup. That's disgusting. That's really disgusting. You know, um, I don't I can't stand like that stuff. But the real stuff, oh yeah, that's so good. As I said, especially if you've done the custard right. Oh, delicious, absolutely delicious. So you know what they say: when life gives you eggs, make some nog. Well, it's a wonderful way to have eggs. I'll say that. You will have to, I think, deal with the whites. You have to extract the whites out, and that you have to make turn into something else. But that's okay. All right. So anyway, I think we're gonna wrap it up at this point. Um, I want to thank everyone who joined us tonight. This was a wonderful night, and we had a great time. A little few technical problems to begin with, but we sorted that out, so we're good. Uh, I want to thank all the super chatters who were really super generous to us. I mean, amazingly generous to us tonight, and we are so thankful and we're so grateful. We also want to thank our Patreon supporters who do really help pay for the equipment upgrades. We are very, very appreciative of that because we do get breakages more often than not. So, very much appreciate our Patreon supporters. I also want to thank our regular subscribers who leave comments, likes, dislikes, and basically post URLs of the YouTube videos to other social media sites. That really helps extend our reach in ways that I can't do. So I'm grateful to our subscribers too, who pass the message along that this is a channel worth watching. So anyway, I want to wish you all a great Christmas. Have a Merry, Merry Christmas. Enjoy the day. This is the day that Christ incarnated into the flesh so that he could dwell with us and redeem us from the sins of the world. So with that said, have a very, very great night. Have a very Merry Christmas. Enjoy the day. God is great. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible.